To set the tone, I always hated the town I lived in. I moved there alone when I was 18 for college, and quickly regretted it. It was a decent-sized town, but full of not decent people. There were shootings in broad daylight, robberies, you name it. Well, for the first 3 years I lived with roommates on a side of town that wasn't awful, but it was sketchy. So when I was making decent enough money, I moved out on my own. The house was tiny, maybe 500 square feet if that, super old and poorly built. It was just me living there, so I didn't mind how small it was. But what really sold me was that it was in the middle of nowhere. It was surrounded by a bunch of fields and some wooded areas, with only a few houses nearby. Considering I hated being in town, I loved the idea of living out there. So at the beginning of July, I moved in. Everything seemed super swell, minus not being able to get good internet. A month goes by and everything is still great, and I decided to get a dog to keep me company. He also loved the place, and spent long amounts of time lounging about the yard, and trying to convince the nearest neighbor to walk over and pet him. Roughly 2 months into living there, I started to notice things out of place. Something to note is that an old roommate of mine was using my spare room as storage space until he got moved himself, so he had a key but was never there. He just kinda popped in every once in a while to grab something, and usually let me know beforehand. But I'd come home to my kitchen chair pulled away from the table, or a bowl in the sink, things like that. They were such small things that I wrote them off as my old roommate stopping by, or just stuff I was forgetting. But then my dog developed this crazy bad separation anxiety. Up until now, he didn't even care when I left. He'd just lay on the couch and chew his toys. He never barked, never did anything weird. However, all of a sudden, he began acting really awful every time I tried to leave. He'd cram his body through the door as I was closing it, screaming and barking, and wouldn't stop until I came back into the house. He didn't want me to leave him there alone, at all. I couldn't afford a kennel for him yet, so I decided one day that I'd put a movie in while I was out, thinking maybe the sound of people talking might keep him calm. I only had to finish one task up at work and knew I'd be home early, so I put in a copy of Hamlet. I know, boring, but I chose it because the copy I have is 5 hours long. I knew it would be playing when I came back. 3 hours later, long before Hamlet should have been over, I walked in the door, and not only was the movie not playing, but the TV and the Xbox were completely off. I immediately called my old roommate and asked if he had been over, and he wasn't even in town. I explained the TV situation to him, and he thought maybe it turned off because it was idle for a while. Even though I know this happens, there are several reasons I know this isn't the case. 1, it wasn't idling. A 5-hour movie was playing. 2, even if it had shut off, my Xbox wouldn't have. I've left it on for days by accident, when I was out of town or whatever, and it was still on when I came home. Always. But it was completely powered down this time. The weird thing is, none of my stuff was missing, and the door was locked when I entered. I eventually convinced myself that it was something weird with the Xbox and shrugged it off. That is until my dog started acting even weirder. Remember earlier I mentioned he used to play with the neighbor? Well, all of a sudden, if she even walked by the house while he was out, he'd start yelping and running to me away from her. This was incredibly weird, and made me really cautious of her. I put some cheap alarms on my doors, and slept with my pistol handy. The second night the alarms were on the doors, I was woken up by the one on the back. I flew out of bed with my pistol, trying to convince myself that I was about to shoot some intruder. But once I got to the door, it was shut, and there was nobody there. The alarm had been knocked all the way across the room. The door would have had to open for it to be chucked like that. It couldn't have fallen off and landed there. And something else. The door was locked, but not the way I had locked it. I always locked the knob and the deadbolt, but when I checked, only the knob was locked. The police wouldn't do much as I had no witnesses, and they didn't have much to go on. Needless to say, I changed the locks. I didn't have any noticeable problems inside after that, but later found out that the close neighbor that my dog hated had previously lived in the house I was renting, and the locks had never been changed. I have no way to prove my theory, but it's pretty obvious that she had a key and was coming and going as she pleased. Why, though? I can't figure it out. Nothing was ever missing. But the most unsettling part for me, though, is that she had tried to come in at night until the alarm scared her off. How many times has she been in my house at night while I was asleep? And why? Thankfully, I no longer live there. This takes place a few months ago, as I'm walking home from my friend's house after a few beers. It's a Sunday, but it's not that late, maybe 11:30. It's kind of a long walk, and it's quieter than usual for a small but vibrant city of 120,000 people. Now, I'd lived there for years. I'd been down these streets 1,000 times, but I was almost always biking them. Unfortunately, I'd been hit recently. Until I fixed my bike, I was stuck walking, which was unusual, but I didn't think I'd be any less safe. I take a phone call from the person I had just broken up with. I'm too exhausted for this. Yes, it's really over. So on and so forth. I'm frustrated and not paying much attention to my surroundings, but there's pretty much no one around. About 15 minutes from home, a man trots across the street to talk to me. He asks me something, but I ignore him. He follows up with,
"Oh, you on the phone?"
I glare at him. Yeah, I respond, going back to hammering home this breakup. One needy person at a time. I pay him no more attention. As I get to my apartment, I take a shortcut across the parking lot. Out of the corner of my eye, I notice someone else taking the same shortcut. This sticks out to me. No one would walk that way unless they were coming up to my apartment. That's when I realize that it's the same man as before. He's been following me the whole time. I run. I live on the 3rd floor, off of the fire escape. He's a lot faster than me, and he's gaining. Our footsteps resonate on the rusty metal stairs through the otherwise quiet night. I get to the door of my building, fumbling with my keys. At this point, I'm still holding my phone to my ear, not listening but still too preoccupied to hang up. I unlock the door, and I get through, but it opens outward, and he's right there holding the door before I can close it. He's so close to me that I can smell his overbearing cologne. I have one more shot to get a locked door between us. My unit is the very first one. I manage to get it unlocked lightning fast, and I spin around, trying to close the door. At least this door opens toward the inside. I slam it on his arm, grasping like a cartoon horror villain. With the phone still in one hand, I'm whacking the door on his arm over and over, putting all of my weight into it. He retracts his arm just for a second, and I slam the door shut and lock it. He creepily whispers from the other side of the door,
"Let me in. You know you want it."
No, I don't. I don't even understand how you could think that. He tries the doorknob for a minute or so, and then I can hear him, I don't know how to put it, pawing at the door, like sliding his palms across it. But it's okay. I'm safe. After a minute or two, I hear his footsteps ring out on the fire escape, taking my welcome mat with him. I finally end that call and crawl into bed. I wish I had called the police that night. I wasn't thinking clearly. I did report it to the non-emergency line later, in case he's done this to other women. I know that most women have at least one story just like this, or much worse, but it was my first time feeling so unsafe. I fixed my bike soon after, and never walked without pepper spray again. For a few months, I was afraid that he would turn up. After all, he knew where I lived. But fortunately, I never saw him again. Would-be attacker, let's not meet, and give me back my welcome mat. I'm an American college student. Nobody special. But I just arrived in Sydney, Australia, for an international program with my university, staying at summer accommodations next to a major campus. Now, Sydney is a huge city, and none of the other dozen students on the program had ever been to Australia before. So naturally we buzzed with excitement despite being exhausted from the 14-hour plane ride. At the airport down under, the realness set in, and we all exchanged glances. We were jet-lagged, hungry and tired, but something about being in a new country kept us animated. We all met each other, and already started to form little cliques within the program. 6 boys and 6 girls. Perfect ratio. We arrived at our accommodations, unpacked, and bought a ton of surprisingly expensive alcohol to celebrate. We were all ecstatic, despite all of us being awake more than 24 hours at that point. One of the other dudes on the program, let's call him Will, he'd heard that we had access to the roof with our swipe cards. We grabbed our alcohol and headed up to the top floor. The stairway is a trudge, but it was a beautiful night. There were huge bats circling around above the park. We came from a very snowy, wintry place, and suddenly it was summer, with long, warm evenings. You can imagine how awesome that was. Truthfully, that first night was awesome, and nothing really out of the ordinary happened. We all got drunk, played some cards, took some photos, and went to bed. It was the second time on the roof when we saw it. Now, to understand how that night transpired, I have to give you a description of the building. It's pretty close to downtown, with a lot of tall buildings, perhaps a half-mile toward the harbor, and a large park across the street. The dorm building itself has 8 floors, I believe, and it's rectangular, so the roof is rather long but skinny. The rooftop itself is concrete, one side very open, with chairs, plants, and shade covers, and the other side punctuated with a raised rectangular structure for the doorway. As you can imagine, by the end of the first week we had broken up into smaller social groups. My friend Will and I had become pretty tight, and he had invited Sarah up onto the roof with us to celebrate our first full week in Australia. He brought some wine. Cheap wine, since it's so damn expensive. Will was trying to get with Sarah. He's admittedly very handsome, and I think he invited me up there just to break the ice. We couldn't find a corkscrew, so we had to force the cork down into the bottle with a knife, and ended up drinking chunks of it for the rest of the night. A string of lights around the perimeter had never worked, but last time it wasn't that dark. This time it was, though. Will and Sarah started kissing, and I needed to get out of there, so I walked to the other side of the roof to admire the view. I'm on the far side in the large open area, and my 2 friends are out of sight beyond the stairwell. I get out my phone. I'm texting, not really paying attention, and I hear a really loud slurping noise, like wet and kind of crunchy. It was immediately distressing to me, because I knew we were alone. I turn around, and I see a very pale, very limber figure, huddled in the corner of the roof, near a large vent pipe. The intruder was in a crouching position, facing away, half obscured by a sort of pipe and rail system. But he stood out so clearly, and so unnaturally, with really pointy shoulder blades, and hunched so far over. I couldn't look away. I nearly vomited, and just typing this, I have goosebumps. I'm in full panic mode at this point, because we'd been up here for at least 15 minutes, and the 3 of us had been totally alone. I looked away and I froze, and I got my phone out to call Will, but instantly remembered neither of us have SIM cards yet. I went to Facebook Messenger chat and did a voice call. He answered right away, something like, "What the fuck, dude?" "Listen, there's something on the roof. Somebody behind the stairwell," I whispered, but I was loud enough to be firm. I looked back over my shoulder and the thing was still there, kind of huddled and occupied with something in its grip. They didn't appear around the stairwell right away, but about 5 seconds later, I heard Will. "What the fuck? Holy shit!" The visitor immediately stopped and turned to face me. Even in the darkness, the size of its saucer eyes are still burned into my mind. They were huge on a white face. It was clutching something black and small. I was so paralyzed. It was on my side of the roof, with only a few tables and benches between us. At this point, I fucking booked it as fast as I could, because there was a bit of a wall I had to go around before I got to the door to the stairs. I shut my eyes when I was close to the creature. I almost crashed into Will and Sarah as they booked it from the other side. We burst through the metal door and into the concrete stairwell, and slammed it shut. It boomed so loud I'm pretty sure I got hearing loss, but adrenaline was pumping, and we were basically jumping down each flight so fast. I think it was still echoing when we got to the bottom floor. The three of us were screaming and crying so loud that everyone else in the hall opened their doors to see what was going on, but we just ran to my room. We shut the curtain and didn't open for anything until the sun came up the next morning. The whole thing lasted less than 30 seconds, but we couldn't sleep. We just kept talking and going over everything all night, and drinking. We had all seen it, something very real and foreign. The next day, a large group of us went up onto the roof, and indeed there were a few spots of blood where the visitor had been crouching. Will swears it was crunching on one of the huge bats that circle in the afternoon. That was about a week ago, and I'm still staying on the bottom floor. Suffice to say, I will never go up there again. So I'm currently going through a nasty divorce. I left my wife about 4 months ago and moved into a house by myself close to work. We have a 4.5-year-old daughter, which I haven't been able to see for the last 4 months because my wife filed an injunction against me. Nothing happened, it was just divorce tactics. Luckily, she recently came to her senses and dropped the injunction, and now I have a 50-50 timeshare with my daughter that starts next weekend. Well, last weekend my mom came to town to help me set up the house. Because, you know, I'm a guy. And guys have no sense of decor, right? At least that's how my mom thinks. And when it comes to me, she's right. We bought a twin bed for my daughter's room, and Frozen-themed furniture and decor, because it's her favorite movie. And then we got a bunch of knickknacks to decorate the whole house. Candles, pictures, fake plants, rugs, etc. We did everything we could to make it more homey. Before we bought all these rugs and set up my daughter's room, I kept my cat's litter box in there. So after we set it up, I moved the litter box to another empty bedroom. Well, my cat didn't like the fact that her box was moved. Apparently she had decided that room was going to be hers, and absolutely refused to use the litter box. Instead, she would shit and piss on all the new carpets anytime my mom and I were out of the house. So the entire weekend, the two of us had to clean the rugs. Finally, I decided to put the litter box back until I could figure out a solution, and my daughter's room was right next to mine. Fast forward to Monday, late afternoon. My mom's flight is at 6 p.m., so we leave the house, go out for one last meal, and I drop her off at the airport. I get home around 6:30 to my newly furnished and decorated house. It definitely made me feel more at home. I had no plans that night, so I spent most of the night on the couch, binge watching movies and drinking scotch. Around 11:30 I was pretty hammered and stumbled to my bedroom, closed the door, locked it because monsters and vampires, and collapsed on my bed. I passed out instantly. Sometime later, I wake up to the worst smell I think has ever hit my nose. It was so bad it actually pulled me out of my drunken sleep. It smelled like a combination of shit, sweaty ballsack, ogre trash, and bletch all mixed together. My first thought was the goddamn cat took a shit on the rug again. I ignored it and tried to go back to sleep, but couldn't. The smell was that bad. Finally, I got up, unlocked the bedroom door, and peeked out into the living room to see if she left a surprise on the rug. Clean. I looked in my daughter's room, and there was a nice turd in the litter box, so the smell couldn't have been my cat. I shrugged it off, closed and locked my door, and collapsed on my bed again. I laid there staring into the darkness for about 30 minutes, trying to fathom what I was smelling. Maybe it's a combination of my cat's shit and all the cleaning products we used over the weekend. Maybe a pipe burst somewhere. Did I forget to take the trash out? No matter what conclusion I came up with, none of it made sense. A little after 5 a.m., I get up and walk to the bathroom and sit down to do my business. I browse Reddit for a few minutes on my phone until I'm done. I flush the toilet and then go back to bed. You know that draining sound the toilet makes after you flush? I'm laying there listening to the toilet do its drain cycle until it finally stopped, and it was completely silent. That's when I heard it. A sniff, and the sound of someone clearing their throat. From my fucking closet. I immediately jumped into survival mode. I got my phone, unlocked the bedroom door, grabbed my car keys and bolted. I jumped in my car and backed out of the driveway, and into my neighbor's driveway across the street. I shined my high beams at my house while I called the police. They were there within minutes. The cops approached my car, and I tell them there was someone in my closet. I sleep in the nude, so the cops thought I was just some crazy drunk at first. But after 2 minutes of arguing, they went in to investigate. They were in there for what seemed like hours, and sure enough, they come out with a very skinny, obviously homeless black man in handcuffs. They put the guy in the back of one of their cruisers and approach my car to ask me some more questions. Apparently this guy snuck in through the back sliding glass door while I was at the airport. He admitted to looking for pills, or something to pawn for pills when he heard me come home. He said he freaked out and hid. The smell I was smelling was his terrible BO coming from my closet, 3 feet away from me. This man was in my house the entire night. What if I didn't smell him? What if I had my daughter over that night? The thought of it gives me shivers. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. If you want me to tell your story, or read a creepypasta, email me at the address in the description. Be good to animals, even people. See ya. I'm Corey, and I stopped smoking with Chetrix. I lost a lot of money and time to cigarettes.
Along with support, Chetrix is proven to help people quit smoking.
What happens is, if this dude Chet catches you smoking, he kicks the ever-loving shit out of you. He comes by at random times to check up on you. Hell, he could be watching us right now. When I signed up for Chetrix, I had no idea what I was in for.
Side effects may include nightmares, broken teeth, pissing your pants at any second, internal bleeding, anxiety. If you experience any of these while on Chetrix, well, I guess you'll have to man up and quit being a bitch, because you ain't getting out of this program. Because once you sign up for Chetrix, you can't get out.
I wouldn't be where I am today without Chetrix. Hold on, can we stop recording for a second? Who's smoking? Are you crazy? Did you hear all that shit I said about Chet? Right this second, go throw that in the toilet.
Well, what's going on here? Hey Corey, how you doing, bud?
Chet, I know what it smells like in here, but I wasn't smoking. In fact, we're doing your commercial.
You know the drill, man. Now stand up.
I wasn't smoking.
Get up. Get over here!
If you really want to quit smoking, then Chetrix is the answer. Once again, I'm Corey, and I've been smoke-free for 8 months. Thank you, Chetrix. Will one of you guys drop me off at the hospital?
Ja, snämar, Bergsbus, Rish.
Staying at summer... Oh, fucking, are you kidding me?